And as Dawn mentioned, the questions we receive and can't get to, we certainly are just as important as the ones we do get to, and we will add them to our answers on our VT Ready website. Some of the questions I know have to do with your jobs. How will things change? Will my pay be affected? Will there be furloughs or layoffs? We'll get to all of those. But I wanted to let you know that the questions and the answers to those questions are guided by principles we established as we began to plan for the reopening of the university. And just a few of those principles I think are worth going over because they really do act as a filter for how we decide to proceed. Our highest priority is the safety, health, and well-being of our community. That is the overriding concern all the way through our considerations as to how we reopen. We remain committed to our tripart mission of teaching, research, and outreach. We'll be guided by our strategic plan, and we're committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll make informed, data-driven decisions and operate within our resource capacity. And we'll be flexible and prepared with resiliency and a sense of service that permeates Hokie Nation. As we consider our commitment to our mission, the need to retain talent is paramount. We have good news on that front so far. Enrollment looks very strong among our undergraduates and graduate students and professional students. Research and outreach continue to be essential to support the needs of the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth is calling on us more than ever to take our talents and our expertise and apply them to the problems that we're all facing. As Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia prepares to begin stage 3 of the reopening guidelines, we have a plan that supports our mission while also protecting our community. Some of the basic features are that we'll be working remotely where we can. We will take steps to protect employees whose job cannot be accomplished remotely. And we understand that unique conditions and situations will arise. We'll do our best to be flexible, and we ask that you do the same. As I said, our goal is to preserve talent and as we maintain all necessary operational functions. And all of this must happen within our resource capacity. That picture is still developing, but as we make decisions, maintaining our talent and knowledge base is a priority. If temporary salary reductions are necessary, they will start at the top with executive leadership, and job actions such as layoffs and furloughs will be a last resort. Our goal is for Virginia Tech to emerge from this plan, from this process, from the COVID-19 pandemic as a stronger and more resilient university and on track to achieve the goals of our strategic plan. So let me stop there and let's move on to the questions that you submitted. So Dawn, what is our first question?
Thank you, President Sands. And I will get to those questions in just a second, but we had a little bit of a technical issue. So I just wanted to make sure that I introduced everyone that is on our panel today before we get into some of those questions. Of course, President Tim Sands, and we did hear your overview. So thank you again for that. We're also joined by Senior Vice President and Chief Business Officer, Dr. Dwayne Pinkney, as well as Vice President of Human Resources, Bryan Garey. President Sands, you touched on a lot of different areas, and we are focusing today on employee issues throughout this next hour that we're together. We've received a lot of questions, more than 100 of them. Most of them are related, so we will combine those questions so that we can cover as many topics as we possibly can. And we've also received questions relating to students specifically, as well as teaching faculty, but those are things that we're going to save for one of our many future discussions more specific to faculty. So getting to some of our first questions, again, President Sands, you touched on a lot of different themes that are involved with going back to, with students returning mainly to campus in the fall. And I think one of the main questions that we're getting related to more people coming back is related to testing and what that might look like. One question is there a plan for COVID testing and any sort of contact tracing on campus?
I'm happy to say a little bit about that. Yes, we have fairly extensive plans in that regard. There'll be the final plan, well, I should say the first fully thought out and public plan will be presented on July 3rd. That's our timing. But we've been working on this since the pandemic broke. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we have a great advantage in some ways in that we have in-house testing capability that's been developed over the last several months, both at the Fralin Biomedical Research Institute and the Fralin Life Sciences Institute. And that capability has been leveraged by the Virginia Department of Health. So we've been able to respond to outbreaks in the larger community in Southwest Virginia. And we've also been able to stay at the forefront of the latest developments in testing. So I feel very confident in that piece of it. We are working through a plan that will balance the need for testing with the resources available, but we're going to be focused on making sure that we are doing everything we can to suppress any outbreaks, to make sure people are confident coming back, that we know the status of the COVID-19 virus that causes it in our community. And so, yes, we're going to be announcing that on July 3rd, but that will be a moving situation in the sense that as each day goes by, we learn more about the virus, our testing gets better. And so stay tuned. And we also will be doing contact tracing. We're working with the Virginia Department of Health in that regard. That is their responsibility, but we're going to be augmenting that to make sure that we're on top of that we don't have any delays. And we have plans for isolation and quarantine, which are important components in any public health approach to a communicable disease like COVID-19. So stay tuned, but we are well prepared in that regard.
I think one of the many reasons that we would do testing is because people are coming from different areas. One question being asked is, are there any precautions that are in place for students who are returning from other states, from other areas where they may be seeing more instances of positive COVID implications in those areas?
We are monitoring that situation very carefully because, as you noted, it's an evolving situation. There are places in the United States that a month ago were not hotspots that are now. And there are places that were severely impacted, especially in the Northeast, that are now gaining control over the COVID-19 disease and the virus that causes it. So we're going to stay on top of that. And as we get closer to the opening of the campus and bringing more students back and faculty and staff as well, we'll update those plans. But yes, we will be looking both at symptom attestation, asking our students and faculty to provide information about their symptoms, about whether they're experiencing or have in the recent past. We'll be asking for information about the degree to which they've already gone through tests or antibody tests, any information we can use. And if students and faculty or staff are coming from areas where there's a current outbreak or the prevalence is very high, they should be prepared to quarantine if necessary. Again, we're going to stay on top of that and try to communicate early and often on that because that will evolve with time.
That touches on a question that I was just looking at that came in, President Sands, and you or Dr. Pinkney, feel free to answer this. Will there be any sort of mandatory requirements for quarantining should a student or faculty member even come into Blacksburg from an area where there are more cases?
So Dawn, and first of all, thank you and good afternoon to everyone who's joining us on the Zoom this afternoon. We have been, and we will continue to follow the guidelines from the Centers for Disease Control and the Virginia Department of Health and other, the governor's executive orders have formed the basis of our planning and response, as also does the president's directives. At this point, there is no guidance requiring students or individuals who come to Virginia and who come to Virginia Tech to submit to quarantine. Again, I think the president's previous response provides a really good context for what we will be encouraging for those individuals who come to Virginia Tech from areas that have a high incidence of COVID infection and or from other parts of either the country or globally. The expectation would be that they would be prepared to quarantine. We certainly have worked and planned diligently to build a robust testing capacity, and we'll make that available to individuals. And so while we will be encouraging those things, there is no guidance, there is no directive at this point for individuals to quarantine if they travel to the area from another place. Again, we intend to follow all the guidelines that that come to us either from the state or from the federal government. We're prepared to do that. Our number one goal, again, is safety and health of our students, faculty, and staff. It is a continuing to evolve. The situation continues to evolve, and we're committed to following the best practice and guidelines available.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And, I know that there are a lot of rules around privacy that, HIPAA laws specifically, but a lot of people are asking whether if someone in our community is diagnosed with COVID or presumably has it, will the university community be notified of that status?
Maybe I can say a little bit about that and turn it over to Bryan, because he may have some more specific information there. But if you recall, when we first entered this pandemic, we did announce when the first case was identified that had anything to do with Virginia Tech. We don't plan to make announcements on a continuous basis as to what our specific situation is in terms of individuals who test positive, but that is in the responsibility domain of the Virginia Department of Health, and we have to respect their leadership in that regard. So they will keep us informed. Certainly, if there's an action that we can take that would prevent the spread of the virus, they will let us know, and we'll take that action. But as you mentioned, privacy guidelines tend to be fairly strict in this regard, and the Virginia Department of Health is in charge of that aspect of the pandemic. But Bryan, did you want to add anything to that, or Dwayne?
Sure. Well, I'll just echo your comments, President Sand. We'll absolutely want to maintain confidentiality as much as possible, but also recognize that we will be passing data over to the Virginia Department of Health so that they can begin a tracing operation. We'll want to obviously loop in colleagues, coworkers who may have been impacted when a fellow coworker is ill. It's a sensitive area because we want to protect the entire community. So we're not going to be broadcasting or posting names, but we'll certainly be providing aggregate data to the university. We'll certainly be looking at touch points that an individual may have crossed in order to protect the larger population. So we'll do our best, of course, to maintain confidentiality, but also practice the best practices that we know of today to ensure that when a case is uncovered, that we follow up on it and make sure that we don't spread the disease.
Thank you both. One other question from a faculty member is whether it's safe, whether there will be any guidelines or rules in terms of welcoming visitors to our campus. It's one thing to have students come back, of course, but then to have visitors coming to campus who aren't here full time.
So Don, I'll take that question and to say that we'll be consistent with the best public health guidance and advice that there is. That will apply to all the constituents on our campus, including those who visit the campus. I mean, we have an obligation and responsibility for those individuals who visit the campus. Our responsibilities extend to them. We're very fortunate to have an actionable university motto. We're also very fortunate to have principles of community that inform the way that that we conduct ourselves at Virginia Tech. We certainly have an expectation that visitors to our campus would have the opportunity to avail themselves of those principles, and certainly as we welcome visitors to campus, we'll have an expectation that the guidelines that we have in place for our campus constituents would also apply to them.
Thank you. Almost forgot to unmute myself there. I wanted to talk about returning to work, and there are many, many different layers to that. So bear with me. We'll try to break them down as much as we can to answer many of the questions that are coming in. But related to COVID, some are asking if allowances will be made as we transition to coming back to campus more, if allowances will be made for working from home for people who are at high risk or in specific categories that put them at higher risk for contracting COVID, people with asthma or lung disease, you know, and there's a couple different elements of that this person is noting. Not only them having to deal with those, but risking concerning others if they're coughing or wheezing or sneezing, things like that. Will allowances be made for folks that are concerned about that?
I'd be happy to answer this question. And the short answer is we want to be as flexible as possible. And we want remote work to continue to be an option for those individuals where work can be done remotely. It's been a remarkable transformation just in the last few months to see over 80% of our workforce be deployed remotely, protecting the 20% of our team members who are on campus and also allowing the other 80% to work and contribute, keep the operation moving. So we've learned a lot, and we want to continue to extend an opportunity for remote work, as the president mentioned in his opening remarks. So that's just one sort of, I think, general principle. The other is we know that each individual scenario is different. And so it's really important for employees to talk with their colleagues, especially their manager, and look at their role, look at the opportunities that they can have to work remotely. If those opportunities exist, then that takes care of a lot of the questions that you mentioned on. If the work cannot be done remotely, and we know that there are cases where that is true, then we would encourage people to be flexible in terms of alternative work schedules, in terms of really looking at the workspace and interactions with others. Can that work be executed in a creative way that meets the needs of the institution while protecting the individual? Beyond that, there are obviously some leave options that employees have that allow them to stay in a paid status while we get through a certain period of time. Each individual case is unique. We also encourage folks who believe that they may have a health condition and need some accommodation to work through the interactive process through our ADA team, which is a remarkable professional team who will handle situations confidentially and very, very professionally and well. We have resources available to help navigate. The key is communication, flexibility, and creativity.
Thank you, Brian. I'm going to come back to you a little bit later to talk about some of the leave status options, because I've passed a few questions that are asking about that, but I wanted to talk about this a little bit more first. And I know that you mentioned the importance of talking with your manager, talking with your supervisor, which leads me to a question that is asking if what that will look like, because some folks are worried what those options might be. Particularly, this one is saying they've transitioned to a successful, productive, and safe home work environment. Will they be able to continue that even if their job requirements bring them to campus or need to bring them to campus?
Well, that's a great scenario. And again, all the more reason to have that interactive dialogue with the manager. If the work requirements really have to be executed on campus, then that's something that has to be sorted out with the manager. And that's where alternative schedules, flexible schedules, different kinds of accommodations in the workplace might be able to reach an effective conclusion to get the work done on campus while providing all of the options that we have available to us to protect the employee. It sounds like, just in the way that that question was framed, that productive work was happening in a remote way. And if that's the case, then that's all part of the conversation and the creativity that we ask of our managers and our employees, and the flexibility. At the same time, we have to recognize that these are really difficult conversations. Some work absolutely has to be done on campus. And while we've pushed some of that off campus temporarily, some of it will have to come back on. And so this is where the creativity and flexibility is paramount. And if necessary, the employee may then choose to exercise some of those leave options in order to delay a return to campus. And we can talk about those when you're ready.
Will the current policy, this is another question coming in, will the current policy prohibiting telework because of childcare or because a parent needs to stay home with their child be suspended for fall? And I'm asking this as it's written, but also understanding the difference between telework that is a typical practice for the university pre-COVID,
Right.
different, I believe, from what we're dealing with right now in the midst of this pandemic.
Yeah, that's an outstanding question. And again, I'll use the word I've said about 10 times already, and that is continued flexibility. Now, we've been in an emergency remote work situation now where we've really just deployed people where possible to the degree possible in a remote environment. Some of those fits have been better than others. Some of that work really needs to come back to campus when we return to a more normalized operation, and some of that can remain off campus. We are attempting, as we transition into the fall, to allow a bit more rigor around that process so that we have an opportunity to really better understand what work can remain remote, what work needs to come back on campus. And that's where that dialogue between the manager and the employee is so important. But the short answer is we want to continue to allow some flexibility because we know the challenge of childcare. We know that the school schedules are off, that Wednesday and the county schools aren't even going to be held. We know that many of the daycare operations are not going to be fully operational. And so we are sensitive to that. We are monitoring the situation with the local schools as well as childcare options. We want to continue to provide flexibility. And that's where the whole suite of options that I've already mentioned are so important to really kind of go through on an individual basis. But the short answer is we want to continue the flexibility, knowing that we're not past this yet. And we're not in an environment where we can go to sort of what is best practice for remote work, which is that you wouldn't be caring for your child in any way while at work at home. That is sort of the best practice and the future practice. At the same time, we've also learned a great deal through this process now where people have been quite productive and able to juggle. We've also learned that people have really struggled with that. It is hard to do. So again, flexibility is the key. We're not going to go from one extreme to the other. We're going to have to take an incremental process as we move forward. And again, allowing as much flexibility as possible while meeting the needs of the university. It's an important balance.
You touched on the public school system and that, I don't know the number, but a lot of questions are surrounding that with public schools altering the schedule, as you mentioned, and parents really scrambling to figure out childcare, particularly elementary school age children, obviously. And I hear you, flexibility is the key. Folks are asking how the university will actually faculty in situations where they may need to stay home with their children because they don't have any other options. So talking with your supervisor and having that flexibility to do so, is that the answer?
Yeah, and forgive me, I'll repeat, but try to get a little bit more specific. Certainly flexible schedules are one way to manage that because the nature of the child's schedule may be such that an employee's work schedule can shift to a different set of hours where they can be more productive, whether that's on site or at home. Obviously we talked about remote work as a way for them to kind of be co-located in the same environment with their children. The alternative would be leave. There's the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, which is a federal act that was passed that does provide some paid leave for the purposes of staying home with kids. That is limited. It's quite generous, but it does run out. So it's not a permanent solution, but that is another option that people may have, certainly to help maybe mitigate some of the challenges in really kind of struggling through this return to school or childcare as it ramps up. But that is yet another option that can be explored.
And I promise President Sands and Dr. Pinkney, I'm going to come right back to you.
Well done.
Brian led me to something else.
I think Brian is doing a phenomenal job. I would like to say Brian's given the perfect response, and I think that he's reiterated multiple times the importance of flexibility. I just want to amplify something that Brian has articulated, and that is that while clearly we will state the importance of flexibility, managers' discretion will be important with that said, we know that every solution can't be identical, that we can't have just a completely uniform approach to these challenges. It is important for us to articulate, however, that that flexibility is something that we're not just leaving to discretion. It is important, and we do have an expectation that managers and supervisors will operate under that, with that understanding, and so that to the extent possible, we don't have disparate outcomes. Again, we don't expect every situation to be the same. In fact, we know they won't. But the principle of flexibility and the principle of making sure that we're doing everything that we can to accommodate and facilitate our employees and faculty during this time is important. And so from the president and from the senior vice president and the vice president for human resources, we want to be clear and consistent that these are important principles for us to demonstrate at this time.
And if I may, thank you, Dr. Pinkney. That's really helpful and right on. And just to reassure folks watching, we are creating a number of tools and resources to really enable managers and leaders to help them and guide them in decision making. And as it pertains to remote work, there are tools and resources. There are processes in place. They will be human resources is located in every college and unit working with managers to kind of really think through these difficult situations so that we can have a consistent practice. While if not every situation will be identical and uniform, we can have some level of consistency. So it's our attempt to really kind of balance a consistent approach across the campus while also being sensitive to individual needs.
If I could add yet another dimension to that, I agree completely with what Bryan and Dwayne have shared, but I think when we think of flexibility, there's another element, and that's the time factor. And I might use the term agility. I think our campus, not just with respect to our employees, but with everything we do, we have to be able to turn on a dime, and we have to be prepared to deal with whatever comes our way. So I think it's going to be an interesting challenge for us, one that will build some institutional muscle around this, but the ability to react to changes, both for individuals and their situations and also for the university as a whole, is going to be really important this fall. Because one thing I've learned from the pandemic so far is that what you know now will be different 2 weeks from now. So this is going to require, I think the best term for this is grace. It's going to require a lot of calm reflection and ability to check your assumptions constantly. And that's something that I know Hokies can do. And we've done it through the spring. I think we have an opportunity to do it even better this fall, but that ability to continually adjust, and that puts a special burden on leadership and managers to be communicating to across the organization, not only to the people that depend on them for the latest information, but to stay in tune with what they're hearing from Burris, from the state, from the CDC. It's going to be very dynamic, and I just want to emphasize that, and we're aware of that. It's not just about flexibility when we start the academic year. It's about being able to continue that conversation and to be able to react with some agility as the situation changes.
I do want to go back to what we were talking about, but President Sands, you just mentioned something that I wanted to just ask you real quickly about. You mentioned the guidelines and federal guidelines. How frequently will or does, I know it's ongoing, the university review recommendations, for example, from the Centers for Disease Control as this pandemic sort of evolves and as things change? Is that something that you're
I'd say it's hourly. I mean, I'm not just saying the CDC, but the state guidelines have evolved rather rapidly. We also have the Virginia Department of Health, and then we have our local, I'm speaking for the Blacksburg campus, but each of our locations has a similar situation with a relationship with the local health district. And we have to stay in constant communication. Certainly, if we see an element of our planning in the guidelines that we think is just going to stay in place for the rest of the semester or the rest of the year, we'll continue to articulate that. We don't want our message to be floating back and forth. We don't want that kind of inconsistency, but the reality is it's gonna evolve, and we stay on top of it. I think it's not an exaggeration to say that we have hourly checks on where we stand with respect to the entities that govern us and the best practices.
Thank you. Bryan, earlier you were talking about leave options, leave for employees who may not be quite ready to return to work on campus, or leave for childcare. There are many layers of leave and how that would be used, but I wanted to make sure to address some of the scenarios that people are bringing up through the questions submitted, and have you just touch on some of those to inform them. One, for example, is how will sick leave be arranged for staff members who contract COVID? How will staff members who have at-risk family members be compensated during the period that they're unable to work because they're caring for a family member? How will staff members with disabilities be protected or compensated? Another is asking. And yeah, I think that that about covers it.
And those are a range,
Right.
so I'll try to cover it as specifically as I can, and then really encourage individuals to reach out to their HR representative or contact the main HR office for specific details, because we'd be happy to talk with any individual about a specific case. There are a number of different options out there, and it can get quite confusing, and it's full of acronyms. I mean, yes, we have a very rich sick leave plan for our salaried faculty and staff, and that can be leveraged certainly for illness or to care for a family member that's ill. But even before that has to be leveraged, there is a state public health emergency leave that allows up to 80 hours of leave for, and if you're ill due to COVID, if you're caring for a family member due to COVID, or if there's a quarantine situation. Then there's the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, which is the federal act that also provides another 80 hours for all of those reasons, plus has a much broader expanded set of options for caring for family and or children at home from school. Again, it's a very, very dense kind of rich law. And so individuals will want to work through their scenario to see if one or both of those state or federal leave opportunities will apply to them. Then, of course, you would then leverage the already generous sick leave that we have for some of the scenarios that you mentioned on. So there's a lot to work together that could work together that provides a pretty robust and I think rich set of options for employees. I will say that all of those options don't work for every scenario. And so that's where, depending on the specific scenario, this is where you want to talk to somebody on our leave team or with their HR person in their college or unit to just talk through the scenario and see which one or more apply.
Just talking about leave real quickly in a different direction. A lot of folks are saying that they haven't been able to take leave during this whole process the last few months and are wondering if the leave carryover amounts, whether there'll be any impact or change to that to allow them to carry over unused time for a bit longer.
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, many of us have been at home. It feels like we're on leave, doesn't it? I mean, not at all. I think some people are tired of being at home and want to do something else, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I very rarely meet a colleague who's taken any leave whatsoever. And because everybody's really committed and dedicated and really working hard for the university. And that's really part of the Hokie spirit that the president mentioned. We're grateful for it. I think now it is time to turn our attention, take care of ourselves, take care of our health and well-being. And that would be to use the leave. We have a generous leave package, take some vacation. I know it's hard when there's not a whole lot you can do with it, meaning that things are opening to some degree. But I know for many folks throughout the spring that canceled vacations and canceled trips because there was no opportunity to kind of take that well-earned vacation. You have until January 9th to use your annual leave. That's still plenty of time. And so now is the time to really start planning to use that so that you don't mess with carryover limits and end up risking the loss of that leave. So for your own health and well-being, please map out a plan, work with your manager so that everybody can take some time off and the university can continue to operate effectively.
Next, I just wanted to transition a little bit and talk about face coverings, masks, what a lot of people refer to them in looking at the questions. What are the requirements? And another big angle for this is enforcement. Folks are asking if people are required to do it, one, and also will departments or different areas be able to enforce face coverings, the use of face coverings, physical distancing, and what happens if requests to wear face coverings are not followed?
Okay. So, Don, I mentioned a couple of questions back just how important it is for us at Virginia Tech to rely on our principles of community and to remember our very important motto. And I think that really sets the framework for this question and for this discussion. We will be asking, we are asking our employees, we're asking our faculty, staff, and students and visitors to Virginia Tech to join with us and keeping themselves safe and keeping the entire community safe. A part of that is following the guidelines, the guidance, the best guidance out there now around the use of face coverings and masks, especially when we are inside our facilities and when it's difficult to maintain the physical distance of at least 6 feet. So that is an expectation that we will have for the fall. In fact, we have those expectations now for campus operations. We will continue that into the fall. And we do understand and recognize that there are exceptions. There are some individuals who, for health reasons, are unable to wear a mask, and where those situations are a factor, we will certainly take those into consideration. But we will be expecting individuals to wear masks on campus in our facilities where the physical distancing is not possible.
Dr. Pinkney, can you talk about whether personal protective equipment, or PPE as we've come to know it, will be distributed through campus?
Sure. So our procurement team has been working diligently for months now, identifying PPE, ordering and planning for the distribution of PPE. Our procurement team has been in touch with departments and units around campus to understand their needs. We, as part of our planning, that we will submit to SHEV in just a few days, July 6th, I think, we will have very clear guideline and plan around the use of PPE and the distribution of PPE. The procurement team, again, will be distributing PPE from what we're characterizing as the central store. And so that PPE will be available to our faculty, staff, and students as they need that, as they have articulated their needs. And we've been soliciting that information as well. We understand here that this isn't just a one-time phenomenon, that we will identify all the needs that we have. We'll order it all at one point in time, and then we'll have everything that we need. Our needs will continue to evolve and emerge as individuals and teams and groups come back to campus. And so we know that we will have to continue to order. We recognize that supplies are tight and limited, that supply chains are challenged. And so it underscores the importance of our planning. It also underscores the importance of our efforts to continue with some of the practices that you've talked about earlier on the Zoom related to remote work, so that we can lessen the need for PPE, and for those individuals and units that have already ordered and that will be receiving theirs, to use that PPE judiciously. We want to make sure that everyone is safe, and safety and health, again, is our top priority. But we also want to make sure that we are being wise in the distribution and the use of PPE so that we have it to protect the campus optimally.
Thank you. Something a lot of people are thinking about, and something that certainly brings another layer of anxiety through all of this is talking about budget cuts, the possibility of furloughs and layoffs. President Sands, I'll start with you. You know, I know the Board of Visitors has authorized you to implement pay cuts if necessary. Can you talk about that and that option and what that looks like? And people are wondering if that's going to happen and when, if it is.
The board authorized me to impose pay cuts and furloughs if I feel like with our leadership team that we need to do it. It will be a last resort. I'm certainly hopeful that we won't have to go there. The reason that they wanted to authorize that is that if you don't have that ability, then you immediately would revert to layoffs. And we want to preserve our talent, our people. And if that means a temporary pay cut or a furlough, which of course would start at the top and our higher salaries would be impacted more, then we will go there. But I have to say that I'm increasingly optimistic that we won't even approach that. But I'm not, we're not sure yet. We just can't predict the future. But if you look at the state revenue forecasts that we've been hearing most recently, I listened to the Secretary of Finance, Aubrey Lane, talk about the state of the Commonwealth's budget and its revenue. It's increasingly looking like the impact of COVID-19, while not minimal, with significant impact on the budget of the state, that the impact may be quite a bit less than what was originally feared. So we're feeling that the state is in a pretty strong position. And our enrollment is also in a strong place at the moment. So based on where we are right now, I'm feeling very good about the likelihood that we'll be able to avoid any drastic financial issues going into the fall. But we have that capability, that extra tool if we should need it. I hope we don't. If I'm just basing things on what we know today, I think we're in pretty good shape. But we have that capability downstream if necessary.
I think that helps answer a lot of questions of people asking when you will announce that, if it happens. But is there anything that would, in particular, that would sort of indicate when you would be able to look at that time frame?
Yes, I mean, that's a great question. There are a couple of markers out there. One with respect to the state's revenue, on July 10th or thereabouts, we're going to hear about the impact on fiscal year 20, which is up through the next few days, the end of June. That's the impact that was originally thought to be about $1 billion statewide from the Commonwealth's revenue forecasts. It now looks like, and the latest number I heard from Secretary Lane was 500 to 600 million. And while that's not a insignificant number, it's very manageable at the state level. So we will have a confirmation that fiscal year 20, the one that's ending in a few weeks, is maybe a little stronger than was originally thought. We'll know that around July 10th. Then around early August, we'll have the reforecasting that the state will do, which looks 2 years into the future. And that will tell us a little bit about where we're headed for our biennial budget from the state. So we would expect they will have a reconvening of the General Assembly sometime in late August. By the end of August, we ought to have a new budget. We hope that they'll be able to restore the investments that they had planned to make before the pandemic hit, in which case it'll be excellent news, but we don't know where that's going to come out yet. So around, I would say the end of August, we're going to have clarity there. We have our annual census of our student population in mid-September. And so we're looking at late August, mid-September, that time frame, when we will have a good deal of clarity as to the budget going forward in our financial situation. By then, we'll also have a good idea of how much money we'll need to spend on things like PPE, the additional expenditures associated with managing the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll also have a good idea of the savings we've been able to generate by restricting hiring and restricting discretionary spending, which I think has had a significant impact so far, but we'll have a good beat on that in that August timeframe. So that's kind of the timeline. Is really, it'll be after we start up, but not too long after, that we are able to come back and give some clarity with respect to budgeting and what the next year will look like.
And President Sands, one person is asking if dipping into the university's endowment would be a way to deal with any potential budget shortcomings. Is that even an option?
Well, the endowment itself isn't for that purpose. The resources that are the endowment, most of those funds are predetermined in terms of where they're going to head by the donor. And so we have restricted funds there, not too much in the way of unrestricted funds. And it's really there to support the long-term health of the university. It's not designed to deal with a crisis. We do, however, have reserves that we are required to keep, and they're in pretty good shape. So there's an opportunity there. Again, we have to be careful that we don't damage the long-term financial viability of the institution by, for example, lowering our credit rating by depleting our reserves too deeply. But those reserves are sitting to a large extent in the departments. Some of them are centrally held, but a lot of them are distributed. So and then really this, I'll turn it over to Chief Business Officer to elaborate, but that is something we are always and constantly looking at. If we determine that in, say, the August timeframe or September timeframe, that the hit from COVID-19 from a budgetary perspective is going to be one time, in other words, it's just the current situation, it will be back to some kind of normal budget picture after this wave of the pandemic hits. That's one scenario. Another scenario is that there's a long-term challenge, and the balance between those two will determine to what extent we dip into reserves, or we instead decide that this is not a one-time deal and have to do some structural changes. So let me ask Dwayne to maybe add to that. He's the expert here, but I wanted to give a framing for it.
Well, that framing is excellent, and anyone would be hard pressed to give a better answer than the one the President just provided, from the use of endowment all the way through the identification of the reserves, and those reserves typically attached to auxiliary operations. And in every case where those reserves are concerned, we do have reserve requirements. We have requirements from whether it's the rating agencies. We have reserve requirements that are part of the look that the State Council on Higher Ed does for all of the public institutions within the state. And so, again, I think a very complete answer. An answer that brings a smile to the face of any business officer when the President answers that way. Not much to improve on there.
Well, I've learned it all from you, Dwayne, but I do think it is a great question, and we'll keep the university community informed as we gain clarity on what our budget situation is going forward. We're watching that continually, and I would say also there's a great opportunity to look at improving the operations of the university, becoming not just more efficient, but better at what we do. And Dr. Pinkney has been working on that and his staff for the last year or two, and really, I think, making progress. And that will have a long-term structural impact on the way that we can focus the resources we do have on our people and on our core mission.
Thank you. I want to talk on another topic that we got quite a few questions about, and that is parking. Employees are asking if they'll be required to get parking permits for the fall. If there will be any adjustments based on people being at home more or working from home and not needing to be on campus. Any accommodations there?
Sure. As our operations plans mature, we'll have a better picture of what the needs will be. We clearly have to and will maintain a healthy parking enterprise. Those needs won't go away despite the particular challenges that we have and the severity of those challenges that we face related to COVID-19. Units groups, individuals will be returning to campus, not only in the fall, but in the spring and beyond. So it's important that we maintain a healthy parking enterprise, and we will. It's also important for us to recognize the challenge that that the spring presented for our faculty, staff, and students. And we have recognized that. We'll be working very hard. We are working hard to make sure that we're including some options for faculty and staff for the fall that might involve hourly parking or daily parking. But in addition to making sure that we can and do provide, we will provide parking permits because we will have individuals on campus needing to park on campus on most days, and so that core part of our business will continue. But we understand the importance of also including some options for individuals who will be impacted differently, and we're doing that.
Thank you. President Sands, I wanted to run a question by you that just came in with, are there plans to meet with the Disability Alliance and caucus to address concerns related to COVID and vulnerable employees?
Sure, I'm meeting with the Disability Alliance and caucus on July 7th. But we've been continually exchanging information. We've gotten, I think, some really helpful guidelines that they have provided, and that we have then taken those and digested them and compared them to our policies. So that's ongoing work. It's not about a single meeting, but we're looking forward to having that Zoom meeting on the 7th. But it will continue long after that. One of the challenges that has been unveiled, I think, or revealed by the pandemic is the extent to which individuals who may not ever come forward with concerns over their ability to perform certain tasks or their constraints, physical constraints, or whatever they may be, have come forward now and have at least expressed indirectly or directly the challenges that have been added to their plate by the restrictions around COVID-19. And so we're learning constantly. We talked about face masks, for example, and for some of our population, it's not a small number. People are used to reading lips. I'm one of them in some conditions, and you don't realize it until everybody's got a mask on, how much you depend on that kind of a support. You use your visual capability in this case to help augment your understanding and interpretation of someone's verbal language. And with the traditional face mask, we have that challenge. So we're looking into opportunities for using face shields, especially for someone who's speaking, the transparent face shield. We're also looking at other kinds of face masks that may permit observation of someone's moving lips or gestures. So a lot to learn there. And we, again, back to my point, we talk about flexibility, but the agility is going to be important. We're going to have to be able to react as we encounter these situations. So I'd like to thank the Disability Alliance and Caucus for being proactive in that regard. The more we can do ahead of time, the better. But I think we're still going to discover as we move into the academic year that there's some things we can think about, and we need to be ready to make those adjustments.
Thank you, President Sands. We've got about 3 more minutes left, but I wanted to ask you a question, Bryan, before we go. Something I skipped over earlier. Would the university consider asking employees if they would be willing to voluntarily reduce hours in exchange for reduced pay? Is that
short answer? Yeah, it's interesting because it's actually many months ago when we were going through all kinds of different scenarios that did come up. That is an option. Certainly, it's not something that we want to solicit because we don't want anyone to feel pressured that they have to reduce their hours. So the short answer is that can be an option, and sometimes employees reduce their hours beyond a crisis like this for all kinds of reasons. They'll sometimes change and work a 9-month schedule, or they'll work a reduced FTE for personal reasons or family reasons. So the short answer is that is a potential opportunity. We have not communicated it broadly. We've certainly not encouraged it. But when people inquire about it, we certainly are happy to engage in a discussion and see if that's a potential option.
Thank you. And I'll raise this last question. It's probably something that impacts each of you. What will the criteria be, if needed, during the fall to return to virtual teaching again, if that's necessary? Any indicators to what that might be, even as we focus on returning back to campus?
Well, sure. There are several indicators that we'll be watching, and not the least of which will be the capacity of our faculty and our staff to carry out their functions, their operations, whether it's teaching or performing administrative responsibilities. So again, the health and safety of our faculty, staff, and students is top of mind for us. And it's an important indicator that we'll be watching because it speaks directly to our capacity to have what we hope will be approaching a normal fall semester. The other is that we need to keep track of our ability to provide quarantine for students who may become ill or infected over the course of the semester. And we have set aside space capacity for students to quarantine. And we need to keep an eye on that capacity. As we approach our limits, of course, we will need to be aware of that, because that might trigger the need for a change, a transition to a different mode of instruction. We'll also need to be very mindful of the capacity of the healthcare system to accommodate not only our faculty, staff, and students, but the entire New River Valley community, of which we are a part. So those are some of the indicators and/or factors we'll be monitoring to help us determine what our mode of operation should be at any given point in time.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Pinkney. Thank you, President Sands, and thank you, Bryan Garey, for joining us today and helping us navigate through the many questions surrounding the work that we do. And thank you to everyone watching. And please remember, you can find the latest information on our new vt.edu/ready website. We will also be keeping you up to date there on any future webinars, which we have several in the works. So stay tuned for those. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.